Which Buccaneers player needs a big week against the Dolphins? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this WTSP Wednesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. He is Evan Klosky at eKlosky WTSP. We are your credential members of the media covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I am the deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Evan is, of course, on 10 Tampa Bay and at 10tampabay.com. And you can catch the show every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Evan knows what he's watching for in this final preseason game and drops some predictions as to who is in and who is out when it comes to some of the bubble players. That's all coming up in a little bit, but let's start with some players that need a big week this week. With joint practices, the preseason finale this week against Miami. Evan, who needs to really have a standout performance on Friday night to secure a spot on the roster?
Yeah, I'm just going to go through a handful of options here. I think that the wide receiving position there at the bottom of the roster is wide open between Cameron Johnson. We don't expect Raheem Jarrett to play, but Cameron Johnson, Cody Thompson, I think those are two names that are battling to make a push for that final wide receiver spot there on the roster. I think Keith and Devin Culp are battling for that tight end 3 position. So really watching that as well. Brandon Walton maybe clinging on to that final offensive lineman position. So the offense is fairly set, but right there at the end, looking at that. And then when you go over to the defensive side of things, I'm not 100% sure that Mike Green is going to return. I mean, he's a guy who was on the roster all of last year, but a name that's popping up a decent amount is Ernest Brown. We've heard some really good things about him. We've heard Bowles talk about CJ Brewer a little bit. So I think that defensive lineman, that 6th DL spot is wide open. And I want to see something, probably the most important game maybe for Kalen DeLoach. Need to see a little bit more from him. And then probably I'm going to add a guy like Keenan Isaac to the table, as he's someone who I think could very well be a factor as we head into week 1 there, and we start thinking about kind of the last 5 players in the bottom of this 53-man roster.
Yeah, well, and I talked about Kalen a little bit on Monday's episode, and I kind of talked about how telling it would be on against the Dolphins based on how much playing time he gets. We know the starters are playing. We don't really know, exactly how much the starters are going to be playing, but it's not going to be like the first 2 preseason games where we're going to see a lot of players that are not going to make the roster. I think it's going to be condensed a little bit to some of these position battles and some of these bubble guys rather than, kind of trotting out the same backups that we already kind of know are going to be on the team. So when you're talking about all these guys that really need standout performances, really need to have bigger weeks against the Dolphins, do you feel it's going to be kind of telling, depending on how Todd Bowles uses these guys, if he uses these guys, how many snaps they get compared to other guys at their position?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think some of that's notable. I think it's also very notable to see kind of who the number twos are. Does like we know that Jose Ramirez is probably going to make this team, but like, is Jose Ramirez playing in the first half, or is he solely a second half guy, right? Like, is he going to try to thrust some of these players in a little bit of an elevated role in the first half, considering maybe the Dolphins play some of their better players? Regardless, it's probably going to end up looking like a typical preseason game, what we've seen between when you factor in like Jacksonville, Cincinnati. Like, the backups are going to go in. They're going to play against backups most likely, because the whole point of this is that ones are facing ones, and you want to get the operational stuff out of the way. But yeah, we'll keep track of those snap counts, because I would imagine if you know someone at this point is not going to make the team, I don't think it makes any sense to throw them into the game. You have to get a deeper look at the guys that you're questioning who are there on the fence. We'll see everybody, because, again, you don't want to throw people into harm's way. But for the most part, I am tracking how long certain players are playing, especially at the positions that I mentioned there.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point. Is Ramirez going to be out there with the twos rather than the threes? Is he going to be one of the first two edge guys to come in off the bench compared to who they have start? But, another name that I thought was interesting that you brought up was Keenan Isaac. They have a lot of different players in that secondary that can kind of do multiple things. Christian Izzy and Tyke Smith, we've talked about them numerous times. That's kind of one of the, I guess, to me, is kind of a surprise name. He was with the team last year, but it speaks, at least to me, to the amount of depth that they now have in what we kind of looked at right after the season as being a pretty thin area. Is Isaac kind of the only one in that secondary that you're looking at that could potentially be, the odd man out if he doesn't have kind of a big performance?
When we look, I was going to say Funderburk, but he's in a boot right now, so I don't. Yeah. The decision might be made for him, unfortunately. Outside of, Josh Hayes is a special teams guy. He was amazing last year, not just as a rookie, but one of the best special teamers in the National Football League. I believe he got an All-Pro vote. So I would imagine that a guy like Josh Hayes is going to make the team based on special teams alone. You got to remember, like, those last 5 or 6 spots, you have to do everything. Like when we talk about Devin Cope and O'Keefe, right? That third tight end, you're going to have to play special teams. That's a huge portion of making the roster. Once you get down to the fringe areas, you just wonder what kind of ways Tom Bowles will be able to manipulate the 53, right? Like, do you only bring in 5 defensive linemen on the team so that you can carry an extra cornerback and then put Keenan Isaac on the 53? Because right now I got Jamel Dean, Zion McCollum, Tavier Thomas, Bryce Hall, Josh Hayes. And last year they carried 5 cornerbacks. And considering you have Antoine Jordan, Jordan Whitehead, Tyke Smith, Christian Izzy, and Kayvon Merriweather as 5 safeties, 10 DBs seems like a sufficient amount of DBs on your 53-man roster, right? We're talking close to 20% here of your entire team. So Keenan's kind of that right there on the edge of if they're going to manipulate it as such. So that's what I'm most interested in, is making sure that I don't know if there's a way to maybe put yourself on the roster, maybe knock yourself off. The decision might already be made when I look at it like that. It's just, in the end, you got to leave a good taste. And a lot of these guys are going to land on the practice squad, just the ones who are going to get cut. And I just want to say the disclaimer, because a lot of people freak out that when you cut somebody, they're open to be taken. But you got to remember, most teams are taking their own guys, right? You went through all of OTAs, all of training camp. You would have to be a really special player to be plucked and brought to that team to then be thrown into their situation. I think we saw maybe last year one player head off to Seattle. Typically, offensive lineman, defensive lineman, that stuff, you get a major shuffle. But otherwise, everyone has these wide receivers and cornerbacks, guys they like, and 98% of the time, if you want them on the practice squad, you'll be able to keep them on the practice squad. And that's, I mean, like John Wolford, right? I mean, that's kind of what teams are doing right now is they put two, because of the new rule, they put two on the active roster, and then for the most part, they're able to slip in that third because everyone's got their third they want to slip in. So,
all right. Well, we know the starters are finally going to hit the field. So what does Evan plan on really watching on Friday? That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Right now, the Chiefs and 49ers are tied atop the Super Bowl odds at plus 600, while the Buccaneers are plus 6,500 to win the big game and have fallen even further to plus 340 to win the NFC South. But the early line has them as 3.5-point favorites in their home opener against the Washington Commanders. Meanwhile, the Edmonton Oilers are the early Stanley Cup favorites at plus 850, and the Boston Celtics are the favorites to repeat as NBA champions at plus 300. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategy so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're finally going to see the heavy hitters this week, or at least a significant number of them. So, of course, we want the Bucs to get through this game with no injuries ahead of the regular season, which starts in just under 3 weeks. But there isn't going to be Yaya Diaby out there or Jordan Whitehead, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, a couple of these guys that are still banged up. There's no need to rush them back for this one, but you're still going to see a significant number of starters on the field. You're going to see Baker. You're going to see Rashad has been counting down on Twitter. He's excited to actually have some action. But, what are you watching for? Because it's a little different now compared to the Bengals game and then the Jaguars game. So, Evan, what are you watching for against the Dolphins as the Bucs finish out their preseason schedule?
I definitely want to see operationally them function crisply. No penalties, moving in and out of things, not taking a random timeout because a call didn't come in effectively. Whatever it might be, I just want it to be smooth. We watched a drive. Whatever the results are, but I want it to be smooth. I certainly am keeping an eye on Rachaad White because with Rashad and this rushing attack, we've got such a good taste in our mouths after 2 preseason games. The one knock on Rashad has always been that he's a little bit of a Le'Veon Bell back there. I'm going to dance, bob and weave. And Todd Bowles mentions it, numerous times during the press conference that he likes how the running backs are hitting the hole, that they're just going. And that's been the one struggle for Rachaad White in his NFL career, his short NFL career at this point, is that maybe he's danced a little bit too much. And so we have what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Is he doing that because the interior of the offensive line and the scheme of it all was troublesome? Or is that kind of how he performs naturally? So with this good taste in our mouths about the rushing attack, where we believe the interior of this offensive line has improved thanks to Graham Barton now being the starting center, I'm wondering if Rashad is able to kind of carry that momentum and put it on display. I'm also interested to see how Chris Godwin is utilized. It's a little bit tough to get a taste of everything we see is a little bit of a grain of salt. Like we are seeing the most generic packages from these, like the most like first day OTA install-y type stuff, and score success, like all that stuff doesn't really matter to me. But I do want to see if I get tipped off on the way that these players are kind of utilized. So I'm watching that, and ultimately, again, I mean, the number one thing is just making sure, please, for the love of anything holy, everyone stays healthy. It's like, but I do agree that they should be playing. I'm a proponent of that. And typically, I would actually say that they should play a little bit more. But because of all the joint practices, as I mentioned in the past, I'm cool with them just getting a series and calling it good.
Well, and I am curious to get your thoughts on this because you have been the edge rush man for this podcast over the course of basically the last 6 months. And I was having a conversation with a couple of the insiders that had texted me Saturday night saying, they're not impressed with Chris Braswell. He doesn't look like he's going to be, all that great or kind of going to be along the same lines of Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. And I went back and I watched the game because I couldn't watch it live. There was still a lot from Braswell that I really liked. And I still think that he kind of has all of the tools that you're looking for. He has kind of that makeup that you want, especially in a Todd Bowles defense. But maybe I'm being too easy on him because I liked his film at Alabama. I've liked everything that I've heard about him. What's kind of your takeaway through 2 preseason games now of Braswell overall being, one of the top edge rush rotation guys, given the situation that they have there with the players?
Yeah, I want to make sure that expectations are maintained appropriately for a guy like Braswell. It's very hard, unless you're like a Micah Parsons type player, to make an instant impact on the edge. I think that pound for pound, after quarterback, the toughest transition to make from college to the NFL is on the edge there as a rusher. You're just dealing with behemoths of humans, and they have been around a while. Typically, they've seen all the moves, so you really like technique is what's going to win the day. And ultimately, I think that Braswell is probably a candidate to do better as the season gets going. So we'll see what kind of happens with him. I'm not really factoring him too much into the plans out of the gates, but one injury will probably change that. If we look at the outside linebacker position, like Yaya, Anthony Nelson, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, those are 3 guys who are going to be rotated fairly heavily. Between Ramirez, Braswell, Watts, I think you'll see, who's going to be that 4th guy in that rotation. That remains to be seen. But, if Yaya goes down or Joe goes down, Braswell is going to have to grow up pretty quickly here. So hopefully the main guys, those top 3, can stay healthy for a significant portion of the season, at least to start with. Hopefully they stay healthy the entire year. But if there is an injury, hopefully it's later where Braswell can just kind of get some reps underneath him. Because I do think he's a little bit of a work in progress. That's not to say like projecting him into the future. I think he's going to be poorly. But even like a guy like Yaya Diaby, we all love him, right? He wasn't a world beater out of the gates, and he worked his way into a starter's role. And then he was like learning the playbook and learning how to play the run just as much as pass rushing. And he really developed into a guy that we were hyping up big time entering the season and still hyping up. It's just sad that we haven't seen him in a while. But I like Braswell. I don't know how much I like him weeks 1, 2, and 3, but over the course of the season, I expect him to pick up steam.
Yeah, well, and I love that you brought up Yaya Diaby because I said almost the exact same thing. Also mentioned Shaq Barrett as being kind of a late bloomer, and we all loved Shaq, and it took him a little while too. It took a complete change in teams. But, it's one of those things where, Braswell could really come on when the Bucs are trying to make this push in late October into November into December, fighting for potentially the division or a wild card spot or one of those things. And if you have an edge rusher that can come on and have the same kind of impact that Yaya Diaby did late in the season, that can definitely turn the tide in some situations. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. It's not going to be right out of the gates, but I do think that, as he gets more experience under his belt, as he continues to work with what Todd Bowles mentioned with his feet, with, some of the hand placement things, once that becomes almost muscle memory, I think the Bucs are going to be in good shape. All right. Who is in and who is out? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. All know how much I love going to live events, concerts, sporting events. I'm constantly talking on this show about a concert or a game I'm getting ready to go see. And the first place that I'm checking out when I look for tickets is Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. In fact, if you're interested in seeing the Dodgers take on the Diamondbacks on Labor Day, you can get tickets for 50% off exclusively on Game Time while supplies last. I've gotten tickets to take my son to see his Boston Celtics in Indianapolis and Cleveland. My dad and I used them to get tickets to see our beloved Illinois Fighting Illini basketball team. And I just got tickets to see Rob Zombie at the end of this month using Game Time Picks feature because the deal was just too good to pass up. And with all-in pricing, I know exactly what I'm going to spend up front, so there's no surprises when I get to checkout. I also have the knowledge of using Game Time's lowest price guarantee so that if I find tickets in the same section and row for cheaper, Game Time is going to credit me 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping things up here on the WTSP Wednesday episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And if there's one thing that I have said on this show since 2020, well, I guess it would have been 2021, is that we love the Evan Klosky crystal ball. And it is a little bit early to call your shot on this one, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. I'm curious which bubble players, and maybe you mentioned a couple of them earlier in the show. We were talking about who needs a big week. But which bubble players do you personally see that you feel have done enough throughout camp, throughout preseason, and as of now, you would say, you know what? These guys are going to make the initial 53-man roster.
I'm just going to go right down the line of like each position. So, because I have it up in my Excel sheet. Quarterback, it's going to be probably 2 with Wolford being 3. That's easy. I think that Chase Edmonds might be 4. I think he might be RB4 once this preseason kind of gets to a close. And arguably, if they need a spot, there's a chance you maybe just go Rashad, Bucky, Sean, and say sorry. I mean, he's been out the entire – see, I love Chase Edmonds. He's a veteran in the room. The people speak so highly of him. I mean, he's just a great dude. But that's an option that they have on the table, I think. Wide receiver, I know Cameron Johnson's getting the hype train, rightfully so. We expect him to play Friday, and I think he is right there on the edge. But a guy that I really like who can surprise you to make this team, Cody Thompson. I think that he is a dude who has a legit shot to be wide receiver 6. And I'm starting to wonder if a guy like Sterling Shepard might not be there. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me that Shepard wouldn't be there. They brought him in for depth purposes. Haven't seen much from him. He was kind of one foot in, 1 foot out the door anyway with the NFL as his base. Nobody was calling him. I'm curious if they decide to keep Shep, or would you rather just keep your youth and try to cycle that in, especially because Cody Thompson is a special teams player and Shepard is not. So to me, if you're playing those fringe games, he seems like a guy that you need more so if there's a injury to Mike, Chris, or Jalen, even Trey to a degree, but it's kind of a different. I don't think that he's a direct replacement for Trey. I just think that you bolster your package for Jalen if that happens. But so I really think Mike, Chris, or Jalen, if they get injured, then I'm calling up Sterling. But it seems like a lot to hold on to him as that safety valve. So just food for thought. I like Devin Colt. I think that he just does more. As much as I love Coe as a blocker, good special teams player, he's just very limited in this offense. And I think Devin can do stuff in this offense while also being a special teamer. I think Brandon Walton will end up making the roster as that final offensive lineman, but really darn excited. Elijah Klein, big question mark entering training camp. Boy, has he solidified himself as a dude to watch out for. And maybe if Ben Bredesen goes down, possibly can find himself in some ball games during the season. Outside linebacker, I actually don't think there's a fringe position. I think they're 6 strong. I think J.J. Russell gets the final inside linebacker spot with Kalen DeLoach on the outside looking in. I think that Josh Hayes, as I mentioned, will get the final cornerback spot with an asterisk of Keenan Isaac, who might be like player 54 for me. So if they can, if they want to take Chase Edmonds out, throw Keenan Isaac in, those are sort of the games that I play. But Keenan Isaac might be guy 54 for me. And I would maybe try to manipulate some things to get him on that 53. I have the safeties pretty much locked in with Merriweather as safety 5 and, Chase, Jake, and Zach Treiner finishing out the roster. So that's, to me, the team is kind of set. So when you talk about, Todd Bowles didn't say that this team is as deep as they were in 2020 or 2021. He said that they do have some holes to fill. Tavier Thomas and Bryce Hall are going to make the squad. Does that mean I'm confident in them? Not really. But I think you're starting to see the bones of this team. And as I've stated for a while, when you look at 2025, you're starting to see the bones of this bowl caliber type team really building to a crescendo, which I think will be next year when, again, they could possibly draft another interior offensive lineman. They could possibly draft another cornerback. They could possibly draft another linebacker, depending on if Levante is going to continue to stay. So they're going to start continuing that depth. But I will say then one observation for me, wrapping this all up, I was a bit more confident in the secondary entering the season, or at the beginning of training camp. I was more bullish on the secondary, and now as we get to the end of training camp, a little bit more wary, especially because if Zion or Jamel go down, I think you're looking at kind of a funky package from Todd to really, maybe move Antoine into a different spot, put Tyke and Jordan together. Maybe Izzian goes up to, there's just a lot of, you're really relying on your safeties more than maybe Bryce or Tavier. And I liked a lot of what Tavier did in this training camp. Just that Jacksonville game left a really gnarly taste in my mouth.
Yeah, he definitely had a rough outing, but I mean, you're 100% right. If Jamel and or Zion go down, it does become kind of a sticky situation. And, like you said, we're going to see some funky packages. But you and I have talked on this show about how, we could see Antoine, Jordan, Izzian, Tyke, Jamel, and Zion all on the field together. So I'm sure that's already kind of been in the back of Todd's mind that he can put, 5 or 6 of these DBs out on the field at any given moment because so many of them are so versatile. And just kind of the last thing that I'll add, I completely understand your stance on Sterling Shepard. With that said, I would be stunned if he is not on the 53-man roster, unless, dealing with this injury is a little more serious than we were led to believe, or that we all thought, or maybe Sterling says, you know what, I'm just going to walk away. Thanks for the chance, but I really don't have the fire in me anymore. I can't see them going out and having Baker essentially recruit a guy that they sign and then they turn around and cut him. That would honestly surprise me.
I understand that point. You just got to remember when Sterling was signed, they lost Devin. There was a little bit of a depth issue there at wide receiver. And now as we've kind of gone, like, we didn't know about a Cameron Johnson. We didn't know about a Cody Thompson. I even think that, to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, Rakim Jarrett has been hurt. The problem with Rock is, do you really want to part with a guy that they really like or risk him, considering he has some tape out there just because of some injury concerns? I just think that you have to ask yourself, like, does Cody Thompson maybe fit this team and situation a little bit more? It's a really sticky spot. And again, this is what I'm talking about. You might be able to ignore this, and you might be able to say, screw it. We're gonna carry 7 wide receivers, and like Chase Edmonds goes, right? Or Mike Green is cut. Those are the games that it's really difficult to prognosticate what's going to happen, considering like 48 of these guys are like locked in. And then I can see a way to manipulate any of those bottom 5, even if you want to say 50 are locked in, those bottom 3 with a couple of tweeners. Like there's 5 guys there that are really just kind of like hot potatoing, I'm sure, for the coaching staff of like, do we do this? Do we not do this? So on and so forth.
You know what? Screw it. 10 DBs, 10 receivers. Let's do this thing. Let's figure out the other 33 players amongst all the other positions.
Yeah, I don't envy Ty Bowles and the front office. Next Tuesday it's going to be a tough day. The players even mention it. I think it's a great thing that they now have extended the cut day to just one day, everyone at once, but it does make for a really savage type of day because it'll happen a little bit Monday into Tuesday, but it's just very unfortunate because you're cutting like 30 plus dudes all in one swing of it. So that's the difficult part.
Yep, no doubt about it. All right, that is going to do it for this WTSP Wednesday episode of Locked On Bucs. Evan, let all the fine folks know what you have going on over at 10 Tampa Bay and 10tampabay.com.
Yeah, and don't forget 10 Tampa Bay Plus. We're going to be starting the Blitz up, our Bucs preview show. We're going to have the preseason primer on September 1st. But we should be airing that on 10 Tampa Bay Plus early on the 31st. So on 10 Tampa Bay Plus, you're going to be able to watch the Blitz a day earlier on Saturdays versus watching it on 10 Tampa Bay on Sundays in the morning, where you got to DVR that. And again, 10tampabay.com. You can check our YouTube channel as well. We are about to be into the thick of it. I'm very excited to be inside Ray J again on Friday, sweating my buns off. Doing live shots and talking about this Buccaneers team and seeing Baker and the boys run out there on the field. And man, it's here. It's been, it's been a long off season, but we're finally here.
Almost. We still have a couple of weeks until we get to the regular season, but we're so close. We're like kids on Christmas Eve. We know how close it is, but it's going to feel like forever to get there, right?
Yeah. It's like December. It's like December 10th. We're sniffing the gifts. We're just not quite there yet.
All right. Well, yeah. Make sure you're checking out everything Evan is doing on 10 Tampa Bay and at 10tampabay.com and 10 Tampa Bay Plus. Check out everything that I'm doing over at bucksnation.com. Make sure that you are following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, at eCloskey, WTSP. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider. And please make sure that you are following on YouTube with those notifications turned on or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.